Despite the unforgiving snowstorm raging outside, the air inside O'Malley's diner was thick with the scent of stale coffee and impending violence. Roman Valenti, the undisputed head of the city's underworld, sat in the corner booth, wiping a speck of another man's blood from his expensive cuffs. He was a man who traded in fear, a phantom who dealt in millions and human lives. But the entire heavy, terrifying atmosphere of the diner shattered when a tiny, trembling hand suddenly rested on the edge of his mahogany table. He looked down into a pair of wide, hollow, ice-blue eyes. "I have $1.43, the 5-year-old girl whispered, holding out a fistful of dirty pennies and a crumpled dollar bill. "Is that enough for soup?" "My mommy is crying because she's hungry." The silence that followed the little girl's question was absolute. Behind the counter, the diner's owner, a man who had been sweating bullets just pouring Roman's coffee, dropped a ceramic mug. It shattered against the linoleum, but no one moved. Roman's bodyguards, stationed by the doors like marble statues in tailored suits, subtly shifted their weights, their hands instinctively hovering near their holsters. They were trained to handle assassins, federal agents, and rival bosses. They had no protocol for a starving 5-year-old girl in a frayed pink winter coat. Roman stared at the small, calloused hand holding the meager offering. $1, 1 quarter, 1 dime, 1 nickel, and 3 pennies. The coins were sticky, clutched with the desperate strength of someone who viewed them as a lifeline. "Where is your mother?" Roman's voice was a low, gravelly baritone. It was a voice that usually issued orders resulting in men disappearing into the East River. Now, it was stripped of its usual venom, leaving only a cold, cautious curiosity. The little girl pointed a trembling finger toward the back of the diner. Near the battered payphone, a woman stood with her back to them. Her shoulders, wrapped in a thin, threadbare cardigan that offered no protection against the bitter New York winter, were shaking violently. She was frantically digging through a worn canvas tote bag, pulling out final notices, empty pill bottles, and loose receipts, desperately searching for money she didn't have. "She said we have to share," the little girl continued, her voice pitching up slightly, teetering on the edge of tears. "But I'm not hungry. I want her to have the soup." Roman's jaw tightened. He was Roman Valenti. He controlled the docks, the unions, the underground casinos, and half the politicians in the state. He had built an empire on ruthlessness, cutting down anyone who stood in his way. He did not care about the collateral damage of the city. Yet, looking at the little girl whose blonde hair was tangled and whose cheeks were sunken from chronic malnutrition, a bizarre, unfamiliar tightness seized his chest. It tasted like a ghost from his own past, a memory of a freezing tenement in Little Italy 30 years ago, watching his own mother skip meals so he could eat. He slowly reached out and closed his large, scarred hand over her tiny fist, gently pushing the money back toward her chest. "Keep your money, little bird," Roman said softly, a command disguised as a whisper. He looked up, his dark, dead eyes locking onto the terrified diner owner. "Bring 2 bowls of the chicken soup, the large ones, a plate of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and hot bread. Bring a glass of milk, and if any of it is cold, I'll burn this establishment to the ground. Understand?" The owner nodded frantically, rushing to the kitchen. Roman looked back at the girl. "Sit." She scrambled into the booth opposite him, her legs dangling far above the floor. "I'm Lily," she offered, swinging her feet. "Roman," he replied, feeling absurd. At that moment, the woman by the payphone turned around. Her face was pale, striking but marred by dark, exhausted circles under her eyes. When she realized her daughter was no longer beside her, sheer panic hijacked her features. Her frantic eyes scanned the diner, locking onto the back booth where Lily sat with a man surrounded by terrifying, silent men in suits. "Lily," she gasped, running across the diner. She practically threw herself into the booth, grabbing the little girl and pulling her against her chest. "Oh my God, Lily, I told you not to wander off." She looked up at Roman, terror radiating from her every pore. She didn't know who he was, but poverty had taught her to recognize danger, and Roman Valenti was danger incarnate. "I am so sorry, sir. She didn't mean to bother you. We're leaving right now." "You're not leaving," Roman said. "It wasn't a threat, though it sounded like one. Food is coming. We can't afford." "It's paid for," Roman cut her off. He studied her. Carnelian. That was the name he saw on the faded name tag pinned to her bag, likely from some dead-end retail job. She was beautiful, but broken. Hunted. Sit down, Carnelian. Eat. Carnelian swallowed hard, her protective instincts warring with the gnawing ache in her stomach. The smell of hot broth and roasted meat suddenly flooded the air as the owner practically sprinted over with a tray overflowing with food. Lily let out a small, happy gasp. Carnelian looked at the food, then at Roman, her pride fracturing under the weight of her child's hunger. Cautiously, she slid into the booth, keeping Lily tucked securely under her arm. They ate in silence. Roman watched them, sipping his black coffee. He noticed how Carnelian fed Lily first, blowing on the soup, making sure the girl was full before she even touched her own spoon. He noticed the bruises on Carnelian's wrists, fading but distinctly shaped like fingertips. Someone had grabbed her, violently, a week or two ago. When they finished, Carnelian wiped Lily's mouth with a napkin and looked at Roman, her expression a mix of profound gratitude and lingering fear. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know why you did this, but thank you." Roman didn't smile. He stood up, towering over the booth, buttoning his cashmere overcoat. "Make sure she stays warm," he said simply. He tossed $100 bill onto the table for a tip and walked out into the freezing night, his men filing out silently behind him. But as the door chimed shut, Roman pulled his phone from his pocket. He dialed a number. "Silas," Roman said, the coldness returning to his voice. "The woman in O'Malley's diner. Carnelian. I want everything on her. By morning." The Valenti estate sat like a fortress on the edge of Long Island, a sprawling mansion of stone, glass, and heavy security. Inside his dimly lit study, Roman stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the snow bury the manicured lawns. The fire crackled in the hearth, but the room felt ice-cold. Silas, Roman's underboss and oldest friend, sat in a leather armchair, dropping a thick manila folder onto the mahogany desk. His face was grim. "You're not going to like this, boss," Silas said, pouring himself a measure of scotch. "The woman's name is Carnelian Hayes, but until 3 years ago, she was Carnelian Pierce, married to Daniel Pierce." Roman's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He turned slowly from the window. Daniel Pierce. The name was acid on his tongue. Pierce was the brilliant, cowardly accountant who had managed the Valenti family's legitimate shell companies. 3 years ago, Pierce had siphoned $5 million from the family's untraceable accounts and vanished into the wind. Roman had spent millions hunting him down. The prevailing theory was that Pierce had taken the money, changed his identity, and fled to Europe with his wife and child. "She's here?" Roman's voice was dangerously quiet. "Pierce's wife is starving in a Hell's Kitchen diner, trying to buy soup with pennies? Pierce played her, Roman," Silas explained, tapping the folder. "The background check is bulletproof. He didn't take them with him. He abandoned them, left Carnelian with his debts, a foreclosed house, and a target on her back. She dropped his last name, moved to the city, and has been scrubbing floors and working retail to survive. She has absolutely nothing. No offshore accounts, no hidden cash. The woman is entirely destitute. She's being evicted on Tuesday." Roman stared at the file. The logic of his world dictated only one course of action. Carnelian and the child were loose ends. Even if they knew nothing, they were the family of a traitor. In the Mafia, you didn't leave the weeds to grow back. You pulled them out by the roots. "The Morelli family is sniffing around," Silas added gently, reading Roman's silence. "Carmine Morelli got wind that Pierce's wife is in the city. Carmine thinks she has the $5 million. If we don't handle her, Carmine will. And Carmine isn't known for being gentle with women and children." Roman closed his eyes, the image of the little girl with the sticky pennies flashing in his mind. "I have $1.43. "Set up a front," Roman ordered, opening his eyes. They were cold, resolute. "The art gallery in Soho. The one we use for laundering. Fire the current manager. Forge a resume for Carnelian Hayes and have our headhunter approach her tomorrow morning. Offer her the management position. Salary. Benefits. A corporate apartment in a secure building." Silas froze, his glass halting halfway to his mouth. "Roman, are you out of your mind? She's Pierce's wife. If the 5 families find out you're sheltering the family of the man who robbed you—" "I said do it, Silas," Roman snarled, slamming a heavy hand onto the desk. She is a mother trying to feed her child. Pierce threw them to the wolves. I am not going to let Carmine Morelli tear them apart for money they don't have. And when she asks why a high-end gallery is hiring a woman with no art background, tell her it's a charitable initiative, Roman said dismissively. Tell her whatever she needs to hear to take the job. Put guards on the apartment. Plain clothes. I want them watched 24/7. Within 48 hours, Carnelian's life changed with dizzying speed. A sophisticated woman in a sharp suit had approached her outside her crumbling tenement building, claiming an anonymous benefactor had selected Carnelian for a community uplift employment program. Desperate and facing the streets, Carnelian accepted. By the end of the week, she and Lily were moved into a warm, spacious apartment in Manhattan. And Carnelian was managing the front desk of a pristine art gallery. Roman couldn't stay away. He told himself it was to keep an eye on his investment, to ensure Carnelian truly didn't know anything about Daniel's stolen millions. But every time he walked into the gallery under the guise of Roman Vitti, a wealthy art collector and friend of the owner, his true motives blurred. "Mr. Rome!" Lily would shriek, running across the polished hardwood floors of the gallery whenever he walked through the doors. She had taken to him instantly, completely oblivious to the dangerous aura that made grown men tremble. "Hello, little bird," Roman would reply, his stiff posture melting as he awkwardly patted her head. He brought her pastries from high-end bakeries, books, and small toys. Carnelian watched these interactions with a mixture of suspicion and a blooming, undeniable warmth. Roman was a mystery. He wore suits that cost more than she had made in a decade, possessed a gaze that felt like it could strip paint from walls, yet around Lily, he was gentle. One evening, as the gallery closed and the snow began to fall again, Roman found Carnelian in the back office, staring at a framed photograph of Lily. "You're working late," Roman said, leaning against the doorframe. Carnelian jumped, then smiled softly. "Just finishing up inventory. I still can't believe this is real, Mr. Vitti. A month ago, I was counting pennies for soup. Now." She looked around the luxurious office. "I keep waiting to wake up." "You deserve it," Roman said, his voice dropping an octave. He stepped into the room, the space suddenly feeling incredibly small. "You're a survivor, Carnelian." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Why are you so kind to us, Roman? The benefactor who hired me. It was you, wasn't it?" Roman stepped closer. He could smell her perfume, something simple, like vanilla and soap. His heart, a muscle he had long considered dead and buried, hammered against his ribs. "I am a man who has seen a lot of ugly things in this world, Carnelian. When I saw you and Lily in that diner, I wanted to see something beautiful survive." Carnelian's breath hitched. She didn't step back. The air between them crackled, heavy with unsaid words and an intense, gravitational pull. Roman reached out, his knuckles gently grazing her cheek. Carnelian leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. For a fleeting second, Roman Valenti forgot who he was. He wasn't a mob boss. He wasn't a killer. He was just a man falling desperately in love with a woman he was lying to. For 2 months, the illusion held. Roman split his life in two. By night, he was the ruthless Don of the Valenti family, ordering hits, managing illegal imports, and fighting a bloody shadow war against Carmine Morelli's encroaching syndicate. By day, he was Roman Vitti, the charming, albeit intense, businessman who took Carnelian to quiet dinners and taught Lily how to play chess in the park. Carnelian had fallen for him. It was inevitable. Roman was a fortress, providing a safety and stability she hadn't felt since her husband's betrayal. They had shared their first kiss under the soft glow of a street lamp outside her apartment, a kiss that was desperately passionate, tinged with a possessive hunger that left Carnelian breathless. But in the underworld, secrets are currency, and eventually, everyone goes bankrupt. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The sky was overcast, casting a gray pall over the city. Carnelian had taken Lily to Central Park during her lunch break. Roman, who had a tense meeting nearby, decided to surprise them. He walked along the paved paths, a rare, genuine smile playing on his lips as he spotted Carnelian sitting on a bench, laughing as Lily chased a flock of pigeons. But Roman's trained eyes saw what Carnelian didn't. 3 men in heavy dark coats were converging on the bench from different directions. Their hands were buried deep in their pockets. Their eyes were fixed entirely on Carnelian. Roman recognized the heavy-set man in the lead, Tommy the Rat Russo, one of Carmine Morelli's top enforcers. Carmine had found her. Panic, icy and visceral, flooded Roman's veins. He didn't yell. Yelling would cause chaos, and chaos gets people shot. He broke into a dead sprint, pulling the silenced 9mm from his shoulder holster before he even realized he was moving. Carnelian looked up, her smile widening as she saw Roman running toward them. "Roman!" she called out, waving. Tommy the Rat reached the bench. He grabbed Carnelian by her hair, violently yanking her backward. Carnelian screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. Lily froze, dropping her pretzel, her eyes wide with shock. "Where's the money, bitch?" Tommy snarled, pressing the barrel of a revolver against Carnelian's temple. "Pierce stole 5 million. Give it to us. And maybe we leave the kid alive." "I don't know," Carnelian sobbed, thrashing against his grip. "I don't know what you're talking about. Please, my daughter." Roman was 30 yards away. 20. He didn't hesitate. He didn't negotiate. The monster he had kept hidden from Carnelian surged to the surface with terrifying ease. Thwip, thwip. 2 muffled shots echoed. The 2 men flanking Tommy dropped to the pavement instantly. Neat, dark holes appearing in their foreheads. Blood pooled rapidly on the gray concrete. People in the park began to scream, scattering like startled birds. Tommy spun around, using Carnelian as a human shield, his eyes widening in horror as he recognized the man sprinting toward him with the gun raised. "Valenti!" Tommy gasped, his hand shaking. "You're protecting Pierce's whore?" "Let her go, Tommy," Roman commanded, his voice devoid of all humanity. It was the voice of the devil. His gun was aimed dead steady at Tommy's eye, peering just over Carnelian's shoulder. Carnelian, trembling violently, stared at Roman. "Valenti?" The name echoed in her head. She watched the man she thought she loved, the man who bought her daughter pastries stand with the cold, calculated posture of an executioner. The mask was off. "Carmine wants the money, boss," Tommy stammered, his finger tightening on the trigger against Carnelian's head. "I ain't going back empty-handed. Drop the gun, or I blow her brains out." "Lily, close your eyes," Roman roared. Lily squeezed her eyes shut, covering her ears. Roman didn't drop his gun. He adjusted his aim by a fraction of an inch. He took a breath, and he fired. The bullet grazed Carnelian's cheek, so close she felt the searing heat of the metal burn her skin and buried itself directly into Tommy's right eye. The enforcer went limp, instantly dead, his heavy body collapsing backward onto the grass. Carnelian fell to her knees, gasping for air, clutching her bleeding cheek. Roman holstered his weapon in one fluid motion and rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside Carnelian. "Carnelian! Carnelian! Look at me. Are you hit?" He reached for her. Carnelian violently shoved his hands away, scrambling backward like a cornered animal. Her eyes were wide, filled with a horror far worse than what she had felt with Tommy's gun to her head. She looked at the 3 dead men, the blood seeping into the grass, and then at Roman. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Who are you?" "Carnelian, please, I can explain." "You killed them!" she screamed, scooping up Lily, who was sobbing hysterically, into her shoulder. "You didn't even blink. You just executed them. He called you Valenti. Roman Valenti. The mobster?" Roman stood up slowly, the cold reality of his world crashing down on the delicate life he had tried to build. The sirens were already wailing in the distance. His men, who had been trailing far behind, suddenly appeared in black SUVs, tires screeching onto the park grass. "I am Roman Valenti," he said, the confession tasting like ash in his mouth. "And right now, Carmine Morelli is hunting you because of your deadbeat husband. If you don't get in my car right now, Carnelian, you and Lily will be dead by sunset." Carnelian looked at the terrifying man before her, the blood on the ground, and the flashing sirens approaching. She clutched Lily tighter, trapped between a monster she didn't know and the devil she thought she loved. The ride to Oyster Bay was a suffocating blur of flashing streetlights and the metallic scent of adrenaline. Carnelian sat trembling in the back of the armored Cadillac Escalade, her arms wrapped around a blissfully sleeping Lily. The child had crashed from sheer emotional exhaustion the moment the SUV hit the FDR drive. Carnelian, however, was wide awake, her eyes fixed on the back of Roman's head in the passenger seat. He had taken off his blood-spattered overcoat, leaving him in a tailored Tom Ford suit that suddenly looked less like a businessman's uniform and more like armor. The man she had kissed under a Manhattan street lamp was gone. In his place sat a cold, calculating apex predator who had just executed 3 men in broad daylight without a tremor in his hand. The convoy of black SUVs pulled off the highway and snaked through the affluent, heavily wooded roads of Long Island. They finally approached a set of massive wrought iron gates that swung open silently, revealing the sprawling Valenti estate. It was a fortress masquerading as a mansion, surrounded by 10-foot stone walls, security cameras, and men in dark coats walking the perimeter with tactical rifles slung over their shoulders. Roman stepped out of the vehicle and opened Carnelian's door. He reached for Lily, but Carnelian shrank back, her eyes wild. "Don't touch her," she hissed, her voice hoarse from screaming. Roman's jaw tightened, a muscle ticking in his cheek, but he stepped back, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Silas will show you to the guest wing. Get her to bed. Then, you and I are going to talk in my study." Carnelian followed Silas, the gruff, broad-shouldered man she had briefly seen at the diner months ago, through the opulent, echoing halls of the mansion. The wealth was staggering, all imported marble, antique Persian rugs, and original Renaissance oils. But to Carnelian, it was a mausoleum. She laid Lily on a massive, silk-sheeted bed in a room larger than their entire Hell's Kitchen apartment. She kissed her daughter's forehead, locked the heavy oak door behind her, and walked down the grand staircase to face the devil. Roman was standing by the fireplace in his study, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. The room smelled of expensive cigars and leather. He didn't turn around when she entered. "You lied to me," Carnelian said, the words cutting through the heavy silence. Her voice was steady now, fueled by a mother's defensive rage. "Every single thing about you was a lie. The job, the apartment, the name." Roman turned slowly. The vulnerability she had sometimes glimpsed in his dark eyes was locked away behind a wall of ice. "I kept you alive, Carnelian. If I hadn't stepped in, Carmine Morelli's men would have found you in that diner. You would be dead, and Lily would be sold or worse. That is not a lie. That is the reality of the world your husband dragged you into." "Daniel was an accountant," Carnelian shouted, stepping forward. "He worked for a logistics firm." "Daniel Pierce was the chief money launderer for the Valenti crime family," Roman corrected her, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He walked over to his mahogany desk and tossed a thick file onto the polished surface. "He skimmed $5 million from my untraceable offshore accounts 3 years ago and vanished." "I thought he took you with him." "I spent millions hunting you down." Carnelian stared at the file, the breath knocked out of her lungs. "$5 million? He left us with nothing. He left us with a mountain of debt, a foreclosed house, and eviction notices. If he stole $5 million, why was I digging through a rusted coin jar to buy my daughter a bowl of soup?" "Because he is a coward," Roman said simply, stepping closer to her. "He used you as a decoy. He knew I would look for the wife and the child. While I was tracking your dead ends, he slipped away. But now, Carmine Morelli, the head of a rival syndicate, has caught wind that you're in New York. Carmine thinks Daniel left the money with you. He thinks you're sitting on a fortune." Carnelian's knees buckled slightly. The room spun. The bruises on her wrists from weeks ago, the men who had grabbed her in the alley before the diner, it all made sense now. They weren't muggers. They were hunters. Roman caught her elbow before she could fall, his grip surprisingly gentle. Carnelian flinched, pulling her arm away as if he had burned her. "Don't," she whispered. "You're a murderer." "I am a monster, Carnelian," Roman agreed softly, the admission carrying a profound, weary weight. "I have done things that would rot your soul just to hear them. But I swear to you on my life, I will never let a single drop of blood touch you or that little girl. You are under my protection." "Protection?" Carnelian let out a broken, hysterical laugh. "I'm a prisoner. I'm bait." "You are safe," Roman countered, his eyes flashing with sudden, fierce intensity. "You will stay in this house. You will have everything you need. But you cannot leave. Not until Carmine Morelli is in the ground." Carnelian looked into his eyes, searching for the Roman Vidi she had fallen for, the man who had bought Lily a balloon and kissed Carnelian with such desperate reverence. He was in there, buried beneath layers of violence and duty. It terrified her how much she still felt the pull of his gravity, even knowing the blood on his hands. "And how long will that take?" she asked, her voice trembling. Roman turned back to the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows across his scarred face. As long as it takes to tear his empire apart brick by brick. The war started 3 days later. Carnelian awoke to the sound of distant, muffled explosions and the frantic shouting of men in the courtyard. She threw on a robe and ran to the window of the guest suite. The sky over the Long Island Sound was dark, but a faint, angry orange glow pulsed on the horizon toward the city. Roman burst into her room a moment later, entirely ignoring the fact that she was in her nightclothes. He wore black tactical gear, a Sig Sauer strapped to his thigh, and an expression of pure, unadulterated wrath. "Get Lily dressed. You're moving to the subterranean bunker," Roman ordered, his voice clipping the air like a whip. "Now." "What's happening?" Carnelian demanded, her heart hammering against her ribs as she rushed to Lily's bed, shaking the little girl awake. "Carmine." Roman spat the name like poison. "He just firebombed the Soho gallery. He knew it was my front. He knew you worked there. He's sending a message." Carnelian froze, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of her neck. The gallery. If she hadn't been pulled out of the park. If Roman hadn't dragged her to this fortress, she and Lily would be ashes. The reality of the mob war ceased to be an abstract concept. It was breathing down her neck. For the next 48 hours, Carnelian and Lily lived in a reinforced steel bunker beneath the estate. Silas brought them food and terse updates. The city was bleeding. Roman's men were retaliating, hitting Morelli's illegal casinos and shipping docks. The body count was rising, and the police were overwhelmed, turning a blind eye to the Mafia bloodbath. On the third day, Roman finally descended into the bunker. He looked exhausted. There was a fresh, shallow cut across his cheekbone, and his knuckles were bruised purple. He sat heavily in a steel chair across from Carnelian, pouring a glass of water from a plastic pitcher. "Carmine is getting desperate," Roman said, rubbing his temples. "He's losing money and men, but he's obsessed. He sent a parley request. He wants to trade a ceasefire for you. He still thinks you have the 5 million. Carnelian felt a sickening knot twist in her stomach. You aren't going to give me to him, are you?" Roman looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a ferocity that made her breath catch. "I would burn New York to the bedrock before I let him touch a hair on your head. But I need leverage, Carnelian. I need to know why Daniel stole that specific amount, and why Carmine is so convinced you have it. Think. Did Daniel leave anything behind? A safe key? A cryptic note? An old hard drive?" Carnelian closed her eyes, forcing her mind back to the miserable weeks before Daniel vanished. The arguments, the late nights he spent locked in his home office, drinking heavily, muttering about insurance, and dead men walking. "He left nothing," Carnelian whispered. "He packed a duffel bag and walked out while we were sleeping. He only left his junk. Old clothes, empty bottles. He didn't even leave Lily a goodbye note." She stopped. A memory flickered, sharp and sudden. The night before Daniel disappeared, he had come into Lily's room. Carnelian had been standing in the hallway, watching through the crack in the door. Daniel, reeking of scotch, had handed the sleeping 5-year-old a cheap, plastic music box, a tacky thing, with a spinning ballerina that played a tinny version of Swan Lake. He had kissed her forehead and whispered something Carnelian couldn't hear. "Wait," Carnelian gasped, her eyes flying open. "The music box." Roman leaned forward instantly. "What music box?" Daniel bought Lily a music box the night before he left. It was out of character. He never bought her gifts. It's cheap plastic. I almost threw it away a dozen times, but Lily wouldn't let me. She keeps it in her backpack. Roman was already on his feet, crossing the bunker to where Lily's worn canvas backpack sat in the corner. He unzipped it, rummaging past a coloring book and a stuffed bear until his large hand pulled out a chipped, pink plastic box. He brought it to the metal table. Carnelian watched as he flipped it over, examining the seams. With a heavy pocket knife, Roman pried the bottom panel of the box open. The cheap plastic snapped. Inside, taped to the bottom of the winding mechanism, was not a key or a stack of bills. It was a tiny, encrypted titanium flash drive and a crumpled piece of paper that looked like a baggage claim ticket from Grand Central Terminal. Roman held the flash drive up to the dim bunker light, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. It was the first time Carnelian had seen him smile in days, and it terrified her. It was the smile of a wolf baring its teeth. "Silas!" Roman roared up the concrete stairwell. "Get the tech team down here, now!" Within 20 minutes, a nervous, bespectacled hacker in Roman's employ had the drive plugged into a secured laptop. Code cascaded down the screen as they bypassed Daniel's rudimentary passwords. When the files finally opened, Roman and Silas leaned over the screen, their expressions darkening with every click. "Son of a bitch," Silas breathed, pulling a cigar from his pocket but forgetting to light it. "Pierce didn't steal the money." Carnelian stood up, confused. "What do you mean?" "Look at these routing numbers," Roman said, pointing to the screen. "Daniel was an accountant, yes, but he was a meticulous coward. He didn't have the nerve to steal from me. Carmine Morelli stole the $5 million. Carmine paid Daniel a fraction of it to cook the books, manipulate the shell companies, and make it look like Daniel was the thief." "Then why did Daniel run?" Carnelian asked, her head spinning. "Because Carmine was going to kill him the moment the transfer cleared to tie up the loose end," Roman explained, his voice turning lethal. "Daniel figured it out. He ran to save his own skin, but he kept the digital trail, the ledger of Carmine's theft, as an insurance policy. He hid it with you, hoping Carmine would never look in a kid's toy. And this?" Roman picked up the crumpled piece of paper, the baggage claim ticket. "This is likely the hard copies, the physical proof." Carnelian stared at the plastic pieces of the music box on the table. Her husband had left his 5-year-old daughter not with a gift, but with a target on her back. He had turned them into human shields. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, it stole the air from her lungs. "Carmine doesn't want you because he thinks you have the money," Roman realized, turning to Carnelian, his eyes blazing with a dangerous revelation. "He knows he has the money. He wants you because he thinks Daniel left you the proof that he stole from the Valenti family. If the commission, the heads of the 5 families, finds out Carmine stole from another boss, they will execute him themselves. You hold the rope to hang Carmine Morelli." The bunker door suddenly flew open. One of Roman's captains, breathless and bleeding from a graze on his shoulder, stumbled down the stairs. "Boss," the man gasped. "It's a full assault. Morelli's men just breached the outer gates. They've got heavy artillery. They aren't here for a parley. They're here to level the compound and kill the girl." Roman didn't flinch. He slowly ejected the flash drive from the laptop, slipping it into his tactical vest. He turned to Carnelian, the Mafia boss fully eclipsing the man she loved. "Stay here," Roman commanded, drawing his weapon. "Silas, lock the vault door behind me. Nobody gets in." "Roman, wait!" Carnelian cried out, grabbing his arm before he could turn away. Her fear was entirely eclipsed by a sudden, desperate terror of losing him. She didn't care about the blood or the Mafia or the lies anymore. She just saw the man who had bought her child's soup when she was starving. "Please, come back." Roman paused. He reached up, his thumb gently wiping a stray tear from Carnelian's cheek. For a fraction of a second, his armor cracked. "I always come back for you, little bird," he murmured. Then, Roman Valenti turned, walked up the concrete stairs, and went to war. The heavy steel door of the bunker slammed shut, the hydraulic locks engaging with a resounding, final clank that echoed in Carnelian's chest. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Above them, a war was raging, but down in the concrete belly of the estate, Carnelian could only hear the ragged rhythm of her own breathing and the soft, innocent snores of Lily, who had miraculously fallen back asleep on a military cot. Upstairs, the Valenti estate was transforming into an abattoir. Roman moved through the darkened corridors of his home with the lethal grace of a phantom. The grand foyer, with its sweeping mahogany staircase and imported Italian marble, was bathed in the harsh, strobing light of the security alarms. Carmine Morelli had brought an army. 24 heavily armed men had breached the front gates, driving armored SUVs directly through the manicured hedges and opening fire on the mansion's facade. "They're bottlenecking at the east portico," Silas barked over the encrypted radio earpiece, the sound of automatic gunfire deafening in the background. "They're using breaching charges on the reinforced glass." "Let them in," Roman replied, his voice chillingly calm as he checked the magazine of his customized M4 carbine. He stood in the shadows of the second-floor gallery, looking down at the massive oak front doors. "We end this in the foyer. No one gets past the grand staircase." Seconds later, the front doors exploded inward. A shockwave of splintered wood, shattered glass, and freezing night air ripped through the hall. Carmine's men flooded in, their tactical flashlights cutting through the settling dust. In the center of the chaotic formation stood Carmine Morelli himself, a vicious, stocky man in a bespoke camel hair overcoat, clutching a submachine gun. He looked unhinged, driven by the desperate panic of a man who knew a noose was tightening around his neck. "Valenti!" Carmine roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Give me the woman and the kid! Hand over the drive, and I walk away. You don't have to die for Pierce's whore." Roman stepped out of the shadows at the top of the landing. He didn't bother to take cover. He looked down at the rival boss with eyes as dead and cold as the Long Island Sound in January. "You're a dead man breathing, Carmine," Roman said, his voice easily carrying over the ringing silence that had temporarily fallen over the hall. His men, dozens of Valenti soldiers hidden behind marble pillars and on the sweeping balconies, simultaneously trained the red laser sights of their rifles onto Carmine and his crew. Suddenly, the Morelli men realized they hadn't breached a fortress. They had walked into a slaughterhouse. Carmine's face paled, but he raised his weapon. "I have 50 more men outside, Roman. You can't kill us all." "I don't need to," Roman replied, a dark, mocking smirk playing on his lips. He reached into his tactical vest with his free hand and pulled out a sleek, black satellite phone. "While you were busy blowing up my front door, Silas and I were on a conference call. We decrypted Daniel Pierce's little insurance policy, the ledger." Carmine froze. The bravado drained from his face, replaced by a visceral, animalistic terror. "I just transmitted the entire drive to the commission," Roman continued smoothly, his thumb resting casually on the phone screen. "Every wire transfer, every offshore account, every penny you stole from the 5 families and blamed on a deadbeat accountant. The heads of the families are reviewing it right now. As of 3 minutes ago, there is a $10 million bounty on your head, authorized by the commission." Murmurs of panic ripped through Carmine's men. In the Mafia, loyalty was bought, but survival was paramount. Facing Roman Valenti was a turf war. Facing the wrath of the entire commission was a death sentence. "You're lying!" Carmine shrieked, spittle flying from his lips. He raised his gun, aiming wildly at Roman. "Kill him! Kill him now!" Not a single one of his men fired. In fact, the 2 men standing closest to Carmine slowly lowered their weapons, stepping away from their boss as if he had suddenly caught the plague. "They aren't going to die for a thief, Carmine," Roman said softly. He raised his own rifle, the movement precise and terrifyingly smooth. Carmine let out a primal scream of rage and pulled the trigger. His bullets chipped the marble balustrade a foot to Roman's left. Roman didn't even flinch. He let out a slow breath, aligned his sights, and squeezed the trigger twice. Bang, bang. The heavy rounds caught Carmine square in the chest. The rival boss was thrown backward by the force, his submachine gun clattering uselessly against the marble floor. He hit the ground, a pool of dark crimson rapidly spreading across the pristine white tiles. Roman lowered his weapon and looked at the remaining Morelli soldiers. "Drop your weapons. Walk out of my house. And if I ever see any of your faces in New York again, I will bury you." The sound of 20 heavy firearms hitting the floor echoed through the ruined foyer. The war was over. An hour later, the heavy steel door of the subterranean bunker hissed open. Carnelian scrambled to her feet, her heart leaping into her throat as heavy footsteps descended the concrete stairs. When Roman appeared in the doorway, the breath left her lungs in a ragged gasp. He was covered in plaster dust, his expensive tactical gear smeared with blood and soot. He looked exhausted, older, and terrifyingly lethal. But when his dark eyes found hers, the predator vanished. His shoulders dropped, and he let out a long, shaky breath. Carnelian didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She ran across the room and threw herself into his arms. Roman caught her, burying his face in the crook of her neck, his large hands wrapping fiercely around her waist. He smelled of cordite, smoke, and sweat, but to Carnelian, it was the scent of salvation. She clung to him, tears finally breaking free, soaking the collar of his tactical shirt. "It's over," Roman murmured roughly, his lips pressing into her hair. "He's dead. The commission has the proof. You're safe, Carnelian. You and Lily are completely safe." He pulled back slightly, framing her face with his bruised, calloused hands. His thumbs gently wiped away her tears, smearing a faint trace of soot on her cheek. "Tomorrow," Roman said, his voice dropping to a solemn, serious timbre, "I will have Silas set up a new identity for you, clean passports, an untraceable bank account with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your lives. You can go to California or Europe, wherever you want. I'll make sure Daniel's debts are erased. You will be completely free of this life. Free of me. Carnelian stared at him. She looked at the blood on his hands, blood spilled to protect a woman and child who meant nothing to his empire. She thought of the cold, terrifying world she had glimpsed over the past 3 days. It was a world of monsters. But standing in front of her was a man who had chosen to be her shield. She reached up, her small hands covering his. And what if I don't want to be free of you? Roman froze, a flicker of raw, undisguised shock breaking through his stoic facade. Carnelian. You saw what I am. You saw what I do. This world is drenched in blood. You can't want this. I don't want this world, Carnelian said fiercely, her voice steadying. But I want you. Daniel gave us a normal life, and he abandoned us to die. You gave us everything, and you bled to keep us alive. I'm not leaving you, Roman. Not now. Not ever. A profound, shattering relief washed over Roman's face. For a man who had spent his life accumulating power and wealth, looking at Carnelian, he realized he had never truly possessed anything of value until this exact moment. He leaned down and captured her lips in a kiss that was desperate, bruising, and filled with 1,000 unspoken promises. 3 months later, the heavy brass doors of Grand Central Terminal gleamed under the soft, golden light of the afternoon sun. The station was bustling with commuters, a sea of anonymous faces rushing through the city. Roman walked through the main concourse, his presence alone causing the crowds to unconsciously part around him. He wore a sharp, charcoal gray Tom Ford suit, an unlit cigar clamped between his teeth. But the terrifying aura of the Mafia boss was softened significantly by the tiny, 5-year-old girl skipping happily beside him, her small hand swallowed entirely by his large one. Carnelian walked on his other side, her arm looped casually through his. She looked radiant, the hollow, starved shadows of her past completely erased. She wore a tailored trench coat, her chin held high, radiating a quiet, unshakable confidence. They approached the bank of secure baggage lockers near the lower concourse. Roman pulled the crumpled claim ticket from his breast pocket, the ticket they had found inside Lily's plastic music box. Number 402, Roman muttered, scanning the wall of metal doors. He found it. He inserted the ticket's magnetic strip, punched in a generic code Silas had bypassed, and pulled the metal door open. Inside sat a heavy, dust-covered leather satchel. Roman pulled it out, unbuckling the straps. Inside were hundreds of pages of printed documents, bank statements, and offshore routing numbers. The physical hard copies of Daniel Pierce's ledger, the final nail in Carmine Morelli's coffin, and the ultimate leverage Roman needed to solidify his untouchable status with the commission. Roman zipped the satchel closed and handed it to Silas, who was standing discreetly 10 paces behind them. "Burn it," Roman ordered quietly. "We don't need leverage anymore. The debt is settled." Silas nodded, taking the bag. "Understood, boss." Roman turned back to Carnelian and Lily. He hoisted Lily up into his arms, the little girl immediately throwing her arms around his neck and kissing his scarred cheek. "Can we get soup now, Roman?" Lily asked, her bright blue eyes wide with anticipation. "The good kind?" Roman smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. He looked at Carnelian, his thumb gently caressing the diamond band that now rested on her left ring finger. "Absolutely, little bird," Roman said, turning them toward the station exit. "In fact, I just bought the diner. We can have all the soup we want." As they walked out into the crisp New York air, Roman Valenti knew he was still a king in a world of shadows. But looking at the woman and child beside him, he knew his empire finally had a heart. From a shivering child offering a fistful of sticky pennies to a life shielded by the most powerful man in New York, the journey of Carnelian and Lily defied every brutal rule of the underworld. Roman Valenti, a man forged in violence, discovered that true power wasn't measured by the empires he crushed, but by the fragile lives he chose to protect. The $1.43 wasn't just a plea for soup. It was the catalyst that shattered a mob boss's cold exterior and rewrote the destiny of 3 broken souls. They found light in the darkest of places, proving that even amidst blood and betrayal, fierce, uncompromising love can build an unbreakable sanctuary. In the end, Daniel Pierce's cowardly betrayal brought them to the brink, but Roman's unwavering devotion built them a kingdom.